The fluorescent lights of the modern office are rarely kind. They hum a monotonous tune, a constant reminder of the soul-crushing beige conformity that permeates the air like cheap air freshener. Today, however, those lights felt less like a backdrop and more like a spotlight, albeit one shining on the cold, hard reality of a corporate eviction. My name is Sam, and this is the story of how a spreadsheet warrior became a digital David facing down a Goliath who thought he was invincible. I'd always been the quiet one, not shy exactly, but more of a meticulously organized introvert. While others were out schmoozing at happy hours, I was back at my desk, hunched over lines of code, sculpting digital clay into something that actually worked. My domain was efficiency. Not the buzzword kind, the actual tangible kind that saved companies money, reduced errors, and stopped people from wasting their precious hours on soul-draining busywork. My colleagues, bless their hearts, were mostly a delightful bunch of well-meaning, if somewhat directionless, souls. They'd happily spend an hour wrestling with a wonky spreadsheet that I could fix with a 2-line script. And that was fine. That was my niche. I was the invisible engine, humming beneath the polished chrome of the executive floor. My latest project, though, this was different. This wasn't just about fixing a single process. This was about overhauling the entire team's workflow. For months, I'd been toiling away, sketching out algorithms, refactoring code, and building a software suite that I honestly believed was going to revolutionize how we operated. It was sleek, intuitive, and, dare I say, beautiful in its logic. It streamlined everything from project management to interdepartmental communication, slashing task completion times by a frankly embarrassing margin. I'd tested it rigorously, ironing out every glitch, every potential snag. It was ready. It was a masterpiece. And I was proud. For the first time in my career, I felt that warm glow of genuine accomplishment, that heady sensation of having built something truly impactful. I decided to present it to Richard, my manager. Now, Richard was a creature of corporate myth, a man who spoke exclusively in buzzwords and PowerPoint phrases. His managerial style was less about leadership and more about strategic delegation of blame. He was the kind of guy who could take credit for a successful product launch, even if his only contribution was approving the catered lunch. He was also lazy, gloriously, unapologetically lazy. His greatest skill was looking busy without actually doing anything. His inbox was a black hole of unread emails, and his calendar was a meticulously curated collection of meetings he'd probably invented just to avoid actual work. I scheduled a demo, I polished my presentation, armed myself with data, and walked into his glass-walled office with a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in years. He was on his phone, as usual, gesturing wildly as if the fate of the free world depended on his call. He waved me in with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Sam, my man, what's cookin'?" he boomed, finally hanging up. His tie was slightly askew, a telltale sign he'd probably just woken up from a power nap. "Morning, Richard," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I wanted to show you something I've been working on. It's a new software suite designed to significantly increase our team's efficiency." He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "Efficiency, you say? Excellent. That's what we're all about here. Synergizing our core competencies for maximum output. Lay it on me." So I did. I walked him through the software, demonstrating its capabilities with clear, concise examples. I showed him how it would automate repetitive tasks, how it would improve collaboration, how it would reduce errors. I presented spreadsheets with before and after metrics, projections that practically sang with profitability. The numbers were undeniable, the improvements were staggering. Richard listened. He nodded. He even interjected with what I initially mistook for impressed murmurs. "Remarkable, Sam. Truly remarkable," he said, stroking his chin. This is groundbreaking. You've really knocked it out of the park with this one." My chest swelled. Finally. Validation. Recognition. "Thank you, Richard," I said, my voice thick with relief. "I'm glad you see the potential." "Potential? Sam, this isn't just potential. This is the future. This is going to be a game changer. We need to roll this out immediately. And, of course, we'll need to present this to the executive team. This will put us on the map." He stood up, clapping me on the shoulder with a force that nearly sent my laptop flying. "This is fantastic news, Sam. Absolutely fantastic. You've done us all a great service." He then walked over to his whiteboard, grabbed a marker, and scrawled a single word: synergy. He beamed at it, then turned back to me. "This is what it's all about, Sam. Teamwork, collaboration, that's the real secret sauce. Everyone working together. And that's when the hairs on the back of my neck began to prickle. The subtle shift in his tone, the way he'd strategically avoided mentioning my name, my contribution. Richard, I began a knot forming in my stomach. While teamwork is essential, this particular software was developed entirely by me. The concept, the coding, the testing, it was all a solo effort. He waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. Oh, Sam, don't be modest. That's not how we operate here. We're a team, remember? Synergy. This is a product of our collective efforts. I'll be sure to highlight the collaborative spirit in the presentation. It's all about the big picture, you know? The big picture. His big picture apparently involved him taking the lion's share of the credit. My masterpiece, my months of tireless work, was being repackaged as a group project with him at the helm, naturally. But I developed this independently. I insisted, my voice gaining a sharper edge. I can provide all the logs, the commit history, the documentation. Logs? Commit history? Sam, please, he said, rolling his eyes. We're talking about business impact here, not technical minutia. HR will be handling the official announcement. They'll frame it correctly, focus on the team aspect. That's what matters to the higher-ups. He steered me towards the door, his arm around my shoulders, pushing me gently but firmly out of his office. Great work, Sam. Really. You should be proud. We'll all be proud. The rest of the day was a blur of suppressed fury and growing dread. The team meeting that afternoon was even worse. Richard, beaming, stood at the front of the room, pointing at a slide he'd clearly cobbled together in 5 minutes. It featured a generic stock photo of a diverse group of people high-fiving. And now, Richard announced, his voice booming with false enthusiasm, I want to acknowledge the incredible work of our team in developing a revolutionary new platform that will streamline our operations. This is a testament to our collaborative spirit, our unwavering commitment to innovation, and our collective drive for success. He then launched into a rambling monologue about how everyone had contributed, how different departments had offered invaluable input, and how this was proof that together we can achieve anything. My name? Utterly absent. My software? Presented as a communal triumph. I sat there, a silent observer in my own theft. The irony was thick enough to choke on. They praised synergy and teamwork while actively erasing the individual who had done the actual work. It was like a chef pouring their soul into a Michelin-starred meal, only for the restaurant owner to present it to the critics as a potluck dish. The days that followed were a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. Every time I tried to bring up my contribution, I was met with platitudes about team effort and shared success. HR, a department I'd always viewed as a neutral mediator, seemed to have been fully co-opted by Richard's narrative. I received a generic email from them stating that my role was being restructured due to operational redundancies and that my employment was being terminated effective immediately. Redundancy. The word tasted like ash. I wasn't redundant. I was the one who prevented redundancy by creating the tools that made others more efficient. I was the linchpin, the invisible architect, and they were kicking me out because they didn't understand the blueprints. I was given 24 hours to pack my belongings and hand over all company property. This included my laptop, my access cards, and the keys to my desk. As I emptied my drawers, I found a small, forgotten sticky note I'd stuck to the side of my monitor months ago. It simply said, check section 7, clause C. I'd written it when I'd first started building the software, a reminder to myself to review the company's intellectual property clauses. Section 7, clause C. It was buried deep in my employment contract, a dense, legalese-filled section about the ownership of work created during my tenure. I'd barely skimmed it back then, too focused on the code, too trusting of the system. But now, with the taste of betrayal still fresh, that little note felt like a lifeline. I gathered my personal items, my photos, my worn-out coffee mug, and a few books. As I walked out of the building for the last time, Richard was in the lobby, holding court with a few senior executives, likely celebrating their triumphant efficiency initiative. He didn't even glance my way. I was already a ghost, a forgotten line of code in their rewritten history. I drove home, the city lights blurring through the unshed, tears that had been threatening to spill all day. The injustice was a physical weight in my chest. They'd stolen my work, my credit, and my livelihood, all under the guise of teamwork. But as I pulled into my driveway, a different feeling began to emerge, a cold, quiet resolve. They might have fired me, but they hadn't broken me, and they certainly hadn't anticipated what I'd done before they decided to make me redundant. I walked into my apartment, the familiar scent of old books and stale coffee, a comforting embrace. I didn't collapse in despair. I didn't rage at the unfairness. Instead, I went straight to my desk. I opened my personal laptop, the one that had never been connected to the company's network. I pulled up a secure, encrypted folder, a place I'd meticulously prepared over the last few months, a digital contingency plan. I remembered that sticky note. Section 7, Clause C. I'd checked it, of course. And what I'd found there, tucked away in the legalese, was a critical detail, a detail that Richard, in his rush to claim glory, had completely overlooked. A detail that ensured my masterpiece, my code, my very creation was far more than just company property. It was, in fact, mine. And I had a copy. A beautiful, pristine, and very public copy. The game, as they say, was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The drive home was a blur, the city lights smearing into streaks of neon and regret. Richard's casual dismissal, HR's sterile termination letter, the team meeting where my creation was a communal effort with me as the invisible hand, it all felt like a physical blow. But as I pulled into my familiar driveway, the sting of betrayal began to morph into something colder, sharper, a meticulous kind of clarity. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of controlled chaos, transformed into a command center. The personal laptop, never connected to the company network, was fired up. My digital contingency plan, a fortress of encrypted folders and secure backups, was activated. This wasn't about emotional outbursts, it was about precision. I started with the evidence. Every email exchange with Richard detailing my progress, my queries, my initial presentation. Every commit log for my personal Git repository, a chronological testament to my authorship, meticulously tagged with timestamps and commit messages that left no room for ambiguity. The company's internal communication logs, which I'd discreetly accessed through a back door, I'd built into their intranet security system, a vulnerability I'd reported, only to have it ignored by IT and subsequently documented in a secure, encrypted file. This time, I wasn't just documenting, I was building my case, brick by digital brick. I meticulously organized the contract. Section 7, Clause C, the very clause Richard had dismissed as technical minutia. I highlighted it, magnified it, and cross-referenced it with my employment agreement, a document I'd requested under the guise of personal financial planning from HR a few weeks prior. They'd sent it without a second thought. It confirmed it. Ownership of independently developed intellectual property created using company resources but not based on proprietary company information or trade secrets could revert to the employee. And my software, while deployed on their servers, was entirely my own original concept, built from scratch with no access to their proprietary code base. It was clean, it was undeniable. A week passed. The initial sting of being fired faded, replaced by a quiet hum of anticipation. I'd uploaded an anonymized version of my software suite to a few carefully chosen open source repositories, along with a link to a public roadmap outlining its future development. I hadn't released the core proprietary algorithms, of course. Those remained securely locked away. But the framework, the architecture, the very essence of its functionality, that was now a public entity. I'd even included a small encrypted note within the README file, a digital breadcrumb for those who knew where to look. It contained a single line of code that, when deciphered, would point to a specific, obscure legal precedent regarding intellectual property rights for employee-created works. A breadcrumb for the lawyers, if it ever came to that. The first ripple occurred on a Tuesday, a frantic Slack message from Sarah, a junior developer still on the team. Oh my God, Sam, are you hearing about this? The client portal update is completely broken, like nothing works. Support is getting bombarded. I replied with a casual, hope you guys get it sorted, a hint of a smile playing on my lips. I knew it would break. The version they were deploying was a stripped down, buggy iteration of my software, rushed into production without the final polish, the security patches, or the robust error handling I'd painstakingly implemented. They'd skimmed the code, cherry-picked parts they understood, and discarded the rest, confident they could force it through. They were wrong. More messages followed, a cascade of escalating panic. Sam, any chance you have a minute? Richard is losing his mind. They can't push through the client portal patch. Says it's a security flaw. Heard there's a major client threatening to pull their contract over this portal issue. Can anyone shed light? Richard's in damage control. The gossip filtered through hesitant texts and hushed hallway whispers, painted a grim picture. Richard, blindsided by the catastrophic failure, was a whirlwind of bluster and blame. He tried to pin it on the IT department, then on unforeseen compatibility issues. The executives were furious. Their lauded efficiency initiative was rapidly devolving into a PR disaster. Then came the message that made me pause, a text from Elena, a senior analyst who'd always been a decent sort. Sam, I don't know if you're still checking this, but Richard's asking if you have any old documentation for the portal system. He said something about it being highly complex and needing original insights. Sounds desperate. Original insights. The irony was almost poetic. Richard, the man who couldn't even remember my name, was now begging for the insights I'd poured into the system. I considered my next move. The open source release was a deterrent, a public declaration of ownership, but the real leverage lay in a more targeted approach, a single, precise strike. I drafted an email. No emotion, no accusatory tone, just pure, unadulterated corporate politeness. I addressed it to Richard, CCing the head of legal, the chief technology officer, and the chief operations officer. I also added a BCC to Elena, a small gesture of goodwill for her heads up. The subject line was innocuous, clarification regarding software ownership and contribution. Dear Richard and esteemed colleagues, I began. I am writing to respectfully clarify certain aspects of the software suite deployed on the company's client portal, specifically concerning its development and intellectual property rights. As you may recall, this suite was developed entirely independently by myself during my tenure. While I am pleased to see elements of it being utilized, I must formally draw attention to Section 7, Clause C of my employment agreement, which stipulates that any intellectual property created solely by an employee using company resources but not proprietary company information reverts to the employee upon termination. I paused, then continued, letting the words land. To ensure full transparency and to address any potential misunderstandings, I have compiled a comprehensive dossier of my development logs, commit histories, original design documents, and all correspondence related to the project's inception and development. This dossier is securely stored and can be provided upon formal request from the legal department. Furthermore, to avoid any misattribution or unauthorized usage of my independently developed intellectual property, I have also released a foundational, non-proprietary version of this software suite under an open source license with full attribution to its creator. Details can be found at Link to Repository. I concluded with a polite yet firm closing. I trust this clarifies the situation. I remain committed to ensuring ethical and legal compliance in all matters of intellectual property. Sincerely, Sam. I reread the email one last time. It was dry, factual, and lethal. The implications were clear. They had deployed my work without my consent, and they had no legal standing to do so. The mention of the open source release was a public signal flare, a subtle warning that this wasn't just a private dispute. I hit send. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of my computer. The digital tremors had begun. The company, so quick to discard me, was now staring down the barrel of a legal and technical meltdown, all thanks to a ghost in their machine. They knew they had a problem, a significant one, but the full extent of their predicament, the depth of the hole they had dug for themselves, was yet to be revealed. Part 2 had concluded. The trap was sprung. The days that followed were a masterclass in corporate pandemonium. My inbox, usually a quiet echo chamber, began to fill with messages. Not from former colleagues, but from unfamiliar corporate addresses, marked urgent and confidential. The first few were curt demands, questioning my unauthorized release of company property. I ignored them, confident in my carefully documented position. Then the tone shifted. A direct call came from David Chen, the company's chief legal counsel. His voice, usually measured and authoritative, was strained, a tightrope walk between professional decorum and outright desperation. Mr. Lane, he began, his voice a little too smooth, we've received your correspondence regarding the client portal software. I understand you have some concerns about intellectual property. We would like to discuss this with you at your earliest convenience. This was it, the first crack in their arrogant facade. Mr. Chen, I replied, my voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the palpable anxiety radiating from his end of the line. My concerns are not about potential misunderstandings. They are about established legal facts, clearly outlined in my employment agreement and further reinforced by the documented history of my sole authorship. He sputtered for a moment, then regrouped. We acknowledge your contributions, Mr. Lane. However, the software was developed during your employment, on company time, and using company resources. Our legal team is reviewing the applicable clauses, but we believe there is a strong argument for company ownership. Mr. Chen, I interrupted, my voice unwavering, as my employment agreement clearly states, intellectual property created solely by an employee. Using company resources but not proprietary company information reverts to the employee upon termination. My work was entirely original, built from scratch without access to any proprietary company trade secrets. I have meticulously documented every line of code, every design choice, every timestamp. The version you are currently deploying is a compromised, unfinished iteration of my work. And as you know, the open source release is already gaining traction, demonstrating its independent value. A heavy silence descended. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his legal mind, the stark realization dawning. They hadn't just fired an employee, they'd fired the architect of their most critical system, an architect who held the blueprints and the keys. Mr. Lane, he conceded, his voice now tinged with a new, cautious respect. We may have made a miscalculation. The board is concerned. The client portal issues are escalating. We've had 3 major clients issue formal complaints today alone. This is impacting our Q3 projections significantly. This was my moment, the reveal. I laid out my terms, not as demands, but as 2 distinct paths forward. Mr. Chen, I said, I am prepared to help resolve this situation. However, this requires a fundamental reevaluation of how my contributions are recognized. I have 2 proposals. I paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. Proposal A, I continued, my voice measured, involves a full reinstatement of my role as lead developer for the client portal system. This includes a significant salary increase, a substantial bonus tied to successful platform stability, and full recognition for my authorship and ongoing development. Furthermore, Richard Thompson will be formally reassigned to a role with no direct oversight over technical operations, and all company-issued materials crediting the team for the client portal software will be immediately amended to reflect my sole authorship. I could sense Chen absorbing this, likely running it past others behind the scenes. He remained silent for a beat, then I delivered the second option. Proposal B, I stated, my voice dropping slightly, taking on a chilling finality, is the nuclear option. If Proposal A is not acceptable, I will proceed with a full legal claim regarding the unauthorized use of my intellectual property. This includes demanding the full market value of the software suite, including projected future earnings, a significant financial settlement for the damages incurred by the company's botched deployment, and potential regulatory investigations into the company's IP handling practices. Given the open source nature of the foundational elements and the demonstrable value of my proprietary algorithms, this settlement would likely exceed your current market capitalization. Furthermore, my legal team has already initiated preliminary discussions with IP rights organizations regarding the current situation. I let the implications hang in the air. The choice was stark, a difficult but salvageable path forward, or complete and utter financial ruin. The ensuing days were a whirlwind of hushed conference calls, frantic legal consultations, and executive panic. The client portal issue had escalated beyond mere inconvenience. It was a full-blown crisis threatening the company's reputation and financial stability. The open source release, though not the proprietary code, had showcased the elegance and efficiency of my design, making it clear that the company's version was a pale imitation. Finally, Chen called back. His voice was devoid of its earlier desperation, replaced by a weary resignation. Mr. Lane, he began, the board has reviewed your proposals. They have agreed to Proposal A. Relief, a quiet satisfaction, washed over me. It wasn't about revenge for its own sake, but about reclaiming what was mine. It was about setting a precedent. Excellent, Mr. Chen, I replied. I will expect the amended contract and a formal offer of reemployment by end of day tomorrow. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Richard Thompson was transitioned out of his role, his departure framed as a strategic realignment. The press release was predictably vague, but the digital whispers spoke volumes. He was seen packing boxes with a bewildered expression, his usual swagger replaced by a slumped defeat. The team, though initially bewildered, quickly adapted. My return as lead developer was met with a mix of apprehension and quiet relief. They knew, or at least suspected, the truth, and the stability my presence offered was a welcome change from the chaos. My new contract was not only generous, it was ironclad. It included a significant bonus tied to the successful restabilization of the client portal and a provision for future profit sharing on any commercial applications derived from my software. The team acknowledgments on future presentations were replaced with clear, unequivocal credit to Sam, lead developer. As for me, I returned not as the overlooked employee, but as the indispensable architect. The coffee pot in my new, spacious office, complete with a panoramic city view, was always full. The hum of the servers was a familiar lullaby, and the lines of code on my screen were no longer whispers of betrayal, but the building blocks of my own burgeoning digital empire. I had taken their theft and turned it into an opportunity, not just for myself, but for the very principles of integrity and recognition that they had so carelessly trampled. If watching hubris crumble under the weight of quiet competence and meticulous planning makes you feel a sense of righteous satisfaction, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We believe in shining a light on those who operate in the shadows and ensuring that talent, not treachery, is always rewarded. They fired me for efficiency, but they were burned by the code. And in the end, the cost of their betrayal was far greater than they could have ever imagined. They learned a harsh, undeniable truth that when you underestimate the quiet ones, you risk waking a sleeping giant. And this giant always counts its lines of code.